Matt Dalgleish from Thomas Elder Markets. Great to have you with us again on Flow.
Thanks, Ricky. Always good to be on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Look, the canola steals the headlines when we talk about grains, but beef keeps stealing the headlines when it comes to that side of the meat market. The Eckies hit another record.
That's right. Just a fraction of a cent short of 10.66, Ricky, overnight. So, still surging ahead, which is incredible, really.
Yeah, it just keeps defying expectations, I suppose. It's hard to know where that's all tracking. I think you were saying the last time we chatted, though, you think maybe in the next year that you can't expect those sorts of prices. Things are going to peel off a bit on the beef front.
No, that's right. And, I mean, one of the things that's been driving the ability for the young cattle prices to go up has been increasing prices in the heavy steer or the finished cattle end. And we did see about a month or so ago that also rallied, and we're talking rallying from already historic, record highs and very high prices when you compare our finished cattle to overseas finished cattle. But that kind of went up to that 4.75 cent a kilo live weight for heavy steers, which is just incredible.
Yeah,
and that helped obviously give a bit more confidence to those buying young cattle that they can pay a little bit more again. In trusting that they can turn those animals off once they've gained the weight and still make a profit.
And to what extent do you see at the moment international factors feeding into the domestic price, for instance?
It's one of those things where the impact isn't always immediate. It's one of those scenarios that what's happening on the ground here in terms of climate and the situation with tight supply is far more kind of pressing immediately, and so that's what we're seeing. This real restocker activity has been driving and fueling this demand. But when you start to look over the longer term, it is those international kind of global pricing systems that eventually dictate where we're going to go back to once we increase our production, increase our herd size, and we start to see a more normal season, not so much rainfall through spring and more pasture than what the farmers know what to do with, so they buy cattle.
Yeah, yep. Before we talk about sheep, I just wonder about on the logistics side, to what extent is, when it comes to processing of either variety, is there concerns about either the labour shortage that we've got with the lack of people coming in from overseas or even the logistical movements when it comes to COVID? To what extent do you think people are just trying to stitch up what they can get their hands on right now on a processing front?
Yeah, no, that's a good summary of what's going on. It is an ongoing concern across both beef processing and other small animal processing like goat and sheep and whatnot, and you can include pigs in the mix and chickens. It is concerning with regards to the labour issues there, and particularly concerning for as we lead into the spring flush in Victoria. There's a lot of spring lambs that come forward, and that's the peak of the time in Victorian processing to deal with that spring flush. And there are concerns around being able to kind of process those adequately and not cause any backlog. So we're just seeing how that plays out. But then overlaid on that, you've also got issues around still international kind of freight and transport and getting access to the right level of containers for the right price, and so it is problematic across the supply chain. I guess that's one thing is, given we're at a low ebb in terms of our production and slaughter in Australia, some of those supply chain concerns haven't really been put under the pressure that they would be if we were operating at huge capacities of production. So it's probably fortuitous, I guess, to a degree that we've got such a low herd and a low flock, that when the supply chain's under stress as well, we're not kind of maxing it out with a heap of kind of slaughter of animals.
Yeah, it was a good segue there. We were heading towards sheep. How are things tracking on the pricing front with sheep?
Look, we're starting to see some prices ease, and particularly in terms of the trade lamb indicator, which is, we're back under 900 cents a kilo carcass weight. We're about, I think it's 840 or thereabouts is where the eastern states kind of trade lamb indicator is on a carcass weight basis. And this move down we see in pricing is very much a cyclical kind of seasonal impact. And what's driving that, like I said, is this spring flush we tend to see this time of year, particularly in Victoria. So some of that extra supply is starting to weigh on pricing. But I mean, the good thing is that while we're starting to see those extra numbers come through domestically, we're also seeing some really good appetite for Australian sheep meat in our offshore markets.
Yeah, and we don't often talk about it, but let's just check in how things are moving on the mutton market.
Yeah, look, that's one that's been kind of growing particularly. I mean, it's always been a big market in China. China take about 40% of our mutton on any given year, so that's a huge space. And China's been chugging along nicely. They're up about 5% ahead of the trend in terms of for September. They're buying 5% more than they normally buy, which is pretty robust and good to see that they're kind of moving like that. But the real surprise and I guess the real exciting side has been the growth in demand for mutton this year out of the US for Australian mutton. And just to give you an idea, for September, flows to the US from Australia are up 217% or higher than the 5-year September trend. So it's just been a huge increase in demand for Australian mutton from the US, which is a really good sign for producers.
What's driving that one on the mutton front? Is that what they're wanting to have instead of Christmas turkey there? What's going on?
Look, the US actually do have a very small flock. I think they've got about 5 million head of sheep nationally, but that it's not. It's obviously it's well behind their cattle and their hog, what they call their hog herd, which is the pigs, of course. That's their bigger industries in terms of the meat side, but the actual sheep and lamb industry in the US has actually been in decline somewhat in terms of the size and the production. So there is an aspect where there's less supply, but the real driver in recent years, I think, has been just a change in the dynamic of some of the composition, I guess, of the US population. We're seeing.
Yeah, I was wondering about some sort of subcontinental reference here.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously, it's been an increase in subcontinental Indians into the US, but and also Middle Eastern people immigrating. You've got ongoing rises of one area in the US that the Caribbean kind of immigrants as well, and people from the Caribbean parts of the world. They very much favour goat meat as one of the big meats that they eat in the type of dishes they prepare, but they're very readily prepared to substitute goat meat for mutton. They're quite substitutable in terms of those kind of slow cooked type, curry style dishes, and that really lends itself to that type. And of course, the Mexicans are in the same situation, that they're happy to switch goat meat out for mutton. So that's one of those things too, that culturally there's a few up and coming areas where there's fair demand for that type of product. But also I think there has been a bit of a shift in terms of a bit of a trend that sheep meat, and I'll include mutton obviously with the sheep meat, so it's not just lamb that's seen as a real kind of fancy thing to eat. I think mutton's, in some circles, any kind of sheep meat starting to attach itself to this kind of fancy fine dining type experience, which is a strange thing in Australia to consider mutton to be a fine dining type thing. But I think the American population is starting to open their eyes to other red meats beyond beef, and mutton and lamb are enjoying the benefits of that.
Yep, all good for Australian sheep meat and even goat meat producers. Look, Matt, fantastic wrap across the sectors there. Thanks so much for your input. And where can people find out more about Thomas Elder Markets and your analysis on markets?
Yeah, look, Thomas Elder Markets website is the best thing to go through, so thomaseldermarkets.com.au, and all of the analysis on there is absolutely free. You can subscribe to that if you want to get the updates as they come in. And follow us on Twitter is the other thing. If you're on social media, at TE Markets is our Twitter handle.
No problem. Matt, thanks again for joining us on Flow.
Cheers, Ricky.